Okay, well, everybody, thank you very, very much. Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Boyd, Floyd, the library, the Trails Committee, but mostly I want to thank all of you who are sitting out there paying attention to this. I thank you very much. And on behalf of all the people I'm speaking for, I especially thank you. They're 2,000 miles away, and we can forget about them pretty easily. So I'm going to tell you a lot of stories here. I'm going to tell you about open hearts. I'll tell you stories about the human spirit, and I'll tell you some stories about broken hearts. One thing I want to apologize for is that it's going to be just me talking until the very end. And this is not a presentation that I am fond of giving, just talking, but there's a Annunciation House, I'll tell you more about that later. A definition. We talk a lot about the migrants down on the border. The migrants I'm going to be speaking of are all asylum seekers. And instead of calling them asylum seekers every time, I'm going to use the word asylees, which is what's commonly used. So you'll hear that word a fair bit. One more point. One thing I'm not going to be doing today is talking about the politics on the border. There's a couple of reasons. One is this platform from the library would like to be apolitical, and I understand that and I respect it. That's part of it. But another part is the stories I'm going to tell you I consider very sacred, very personal. And the people that told them to me are even more sacred in my heart. These asylees, the migrants in general on the border, have been political pawns for a long time, especially the last few years. And I don't want to put them in that position tonight. However, I have political views, and if you're interested, see me on the street. My contact will be at the end. I'll talk anytime about that. Okay, I want to get us going. And I'm going to start that by asking you to join me in the shelter, in the office. And we're sitting there. It's in the morning, probably about 11 o'clock, and alarm goes off. We look around on the video monitors and we see that somebody wants to get in a gate. We look at that video and it's an ICE bus. Okay, we let them in. Join me as we walk outside to greet that bus. It's a long walk, take us several minutes, but it takes a while for the bus to get there. We get out there and the bus is pulling in. First off are two armed ICE guards. They're not unfriendly, they're very businesslike. It's kind of different if there's women ICE guards. That's a very different scene, but they're okay. It could be a lot worse. And then the asylees begin to depart the bus. They're stepping down and they're gathering just outside the door. It's interesting, they stay in a really tight group. They don't spread out much at all. You notice that. You notice that there's a lot of children. Hey, in the end, there's as many children as there are adults. The adults are hollow-eyed, nervously stepping one foot to another, looking around. They're looking at the chain link fence that surrounds our parking area, the concertina wire on top of that. The children, in the meantime, are just hanging out. They're poking each other and running around and seemingly unaffected by their journey and where they are today. You notice as the asylees step off the bus, they're walking rather awkwardly. Hey, they don't have any shoelaces. None of them have shoelaces. And oh, none of them have belts either. What they do have is a plastic bag that apparently contains all their belongings. Well, here's what we do know, that when they left home, they had backpacks, boxes, maybe even a suitcase, and in their maybe 2,000-mile journey, everything they owned got stolen or just taken away somehow as they tried to make their way to the border. And whatever was left by the time they got to the border patrol put aside and stored for them with the assurance that they could come back and get their belongings anytime they wanted at a certain time and at a certain place. Turns out it's fairly difficult for anybody to do that, especially if you don't speak English. And so a lot of their belongings stay in El Paso. One thing that stands right out when you look more closely are the ankle bracelets. Every adult has an ankle bracelet, and you notice that the pants that they're wearing have been modified to allow them to take the pants off and on with the bracelet, which means a big rip up the seam. They're all pretty embarrassed about that ankle bracelet, and they're moving their feet around trying to conceal it. It turns out that many of them have been told that they're going to a new detention facility. Well, we wait until the guards get back in the bus leaves, and we talk to this group. And we tell them, first off, this is not detention. We wait because we need to have friends in the ICE agency. This is not a detention. This is a shelter. Everybody here is a volunteer, and we are going to take care of you here. You're going to get new clothes. You're going to get a bed with clean sheets and a blanket. You'll get hygiene things. We have a phone battery that you'll use to call your sponsors. We have showers. They're right next to you. See those there? And you can see their eyes beginning to open a little more brightly, and maybe even a smile or two. We say we're going to give you 3 good meals a day. And in the morning, we're going to serve you coffee. And then the smiles get really big. And there's even a cheer or two. It turns out that many of these people have no idea where they are. People have come up to me later and said, is this Dallas? Where are we anyway? That's kind of one way to measure the complexity of their journey and where their minds are at this point. So this site that I just described to you is a site that comes in front of us 2 or 3 times a day. We'll get 100, maybe 150 people a day coming in that way. They come in buses and in vans. In the vans, we often get the more injured asylees that come out of the van with crutches or so. I'll tell you some stories about that later. So we see that 2 or 3 times a day. Our job is to take all these asylees and to assist them in their connection with a sponsor. Every asylee has to have a sponsor. And the sponsor is going to arrange transportation from El Paso to the sponsor's location. Sometimes that takes a day or 2. Sometimes it takes many weeks. And as long as it takes, we will take care of these asylees' needs, their physical needs and their emotional needs, as much as possible. We get to know them, but it's hard. They're in a dorm, they're busy, there's a lot of them. It's pretty hard to make connections anywhere except at meals. And so we always make an effort to join a table at a meal and talk to these people. It serves many, many purposes, but it's mostly at those meals that I hear the stories. So I want to tell you some stories about the asylees, and I want to tell you stories about others who helped them. These are stories of open hearts, and they're generally happy stories. My favorite is the first. It's a family of 4. I had lunch with them one day. It was a mom and a dad and a 10-year-old girl and an infant. And we talked as best we could. I speak a little bit of Spanish. And they didn't speak any English, but with Google Translate, we navigated that. I got to know them. And then coincidentally, later in the afternoon, the wife came to the office with a question. I was able to answer that. And then it turned out that they were leaving that very day. And whenever a group or a family left, we all gave them a travel bag. And the travel bag was designed to assist them in their journey to the sponsor's house. It had food for as long as it took, drinks if they were on a bus. It had blankets if it was an overnight, sometimes blankets anyway, toys, puzzles, books for the kids, and a big note that said, "I don't speak English, can you help me please?" And so we gave this bag to everybody. I gave it to the man, and I saw a reaction that I didn't understand, but he kind of shuddered. Well, to top it all off, again, coincidentally, I was the one to walk them through the maze outside. This is a warehouse of about 5 acres, and it was a long, complex walk. We got outside, and I said goodbye to the 10-year-old. I winked at the infant, said goodbye to the mom, and I turned to the man. And as I turned, he fell into my arms with his head on my shoulder, weeping, sobbing, holding me as tight as he could, tighter than I could almost stand. I started sobbing too. We wept together, me holding him tight, he holding me tight, for a long, long time. We each shed some grief, and we each felt the gratitude of that moment and where we had been. And after time, we let go of each other, and he climbed in the car. And I will never forget the next picture I have in my mind. I see it right now. He's in the back seat of the car, the window's up. He's looking at me with tears pouring down his face, and he's blowing me kisses over and over and over. And the car drives away, and he never stops. That's the kind of thing that happened every day. I'm kind of choking up now because every day was that powerful. That was a big one. So that's the kind of thing that happened. Okay, here's another example of open heart. Sun Transit, the local bus company, on short notice would bring a bus to help us get migrants out to the bus stations. There were 4 bus stations, or the airport. And they bring an escort vehicle. So it was a big deal. I'll explain later the escort vehicle. 2 drivers, a lot of equipment, and us with this crew of people going different locations and different dialects and different luggage. And these bus drivers were so patient. They wanted everybody to load in inverse order of getting out, and that made it really simple, but it never worked that simply. And they stood there and accepted what was happening. They were great. I was on the bus one day. We always had a volunteer go on the bus. And I was walking down the aisle, and an asylee stopped me. And he was a Central American, a little man, poor, obviously not a man of means by any means. And he asked me, he said, "Tell me about this place." He said, "Is anybody in there paid for this work?" And I said, "No, everybody, all of us." Turns out there were about 8 full-time volunteers. We're all volunteers. And his head fell for a minute. He lifted his head back up a moment later. He said, "I want the address." He said, "When I get settled, when I get a job, I want to send some money." I'm on the bus. That happened often. And nothing was more powerful than being at the bus station or the airport and saying goodbye to the people, to the asylees. I can't tell you what was more powerful in all these stories. I cried every time, and so did they. This was pre-COVID, and we hugged, and there sometimes rosary beads were handed over, and just thank you, gracias, gracias, over and over and over. Okay, hey, on to another whole category, you might say. Most of these asylees were Catholic. And in fact, while Annunciation House was not formally a Catholic organization, they had strong ties to Catholicism. And so over Christmas, I was there at Christmas, over Christmas, we had a huge celebration. It started with a huge Christmas Mass, Christmas Eve. And then after that, we had a Posada celebration. At the Mass, it was beautiful. I'm not Catholic, I'm hardly religious in an institutional sense, but there was music and guitar accompaniment and high Mass and ceremony. But the thing I remember is sitting there and watching a small Central American woman with a very embarrassed teenage son next to her start weeping uncontrollably in the middle of Mass. I never knew exactly what it was. Another Spanish-speaking woman volunteer from the community moved her seat over and sat next to this woman and held her for the rest of Mass. Posada. So we had like 100 asylees and 100 people from the community in there. We dressed up 5 asylee children as Mary, Joseph, and the three wise men. And if you know the Posada protocol, if I call it that, you go to door and you ask to go in. The way we did it is we sang a beautiful Spanish song, again with guitar accompaniment, at each door. And inside at the first three doors, we were turned away musically. The fourth door, we were invited in. That got me big time, big time. We had a big dinner afterwards, celebratory dinner, and I was able to eat dinner, but I had to go to my room after that and just think about what was happening. It was because that fourth door was so symbolic for the lives that these asylees had been living their whole lives, looking for an open door, waiting for somebody to say, come in. It was incredible. The party continued in my absence. There was a huge piñata for kids. And then get this, we had gifts for every child there. And it was a huge amount of effort to get all that together. We had other celebrations. Because we had information on every family, we knew if there was a birthday going on the next day. That was a lot of fun. We would get a donated cake and usually just one candle, and we'd get gifts for the birthday boy or girl. We'd spread the word through the dorm. There's going to be a birthday party in the intake area at 1:45. Sneak up there. Don't tell anybody else. And then the birthday child would be brought up for this huge, big surprise. That was beautiful. And so I don't know, what was maybe most beautiful is in Hispanic culture, that birthday child would cut the cake and hand it out to everybody else before he or she had a slice. Lunch, okay, meals, 3 meals. We didn't even have a kitchen. We served breakfast every day. It was cold cereal, coffee, and if we were lucky and had donated materials, we'd have hot muffins and things like that. But this is amazing. Remember, we have up to 200 people in there, plus a bunch of volunteers. Lunch and dinner, 7 days a week, was brought in by volunteers. Local churches of many denominations, service groups, people who cared. They come in with trucks and cars and bring the hot food in. It's all in protected containers, set it up on a huge table, and then serve it themselves. I mean, just think about that. A couple of other things. I mentioned injured people. People, this is good to know. How did we get injured people? How did they get injured? Well, they were injured either in the river crossing or falling off the wall. And sometimes the injuries were pretty serious. I'll tell you a little story about Eduardo, who came in a van. And we were told he had a broken leg and a broken back. We're not sure it was actually broken in the end, the back. But there's 2 parts to the story. The van comes in, there's an ICE agent going to help, and we've got a wheelchair. And so we want to get Eduardo into the wheelchair, and the volunteers are helping. The ICE agent helps. And as he helps, he's choking up. These people are not all bad. There's some good people there. The wheelchairs were all donated by United Way. And we went through sometimes 10 a month. We had at least 1 injury every week. One thing I worked on a fair bit was donations, looking at what we needed, trying to find them, different places. Boy, if you want to talk open hearts, listen to this. Every morning, every day, I would go down to the lobby and I would find a mountain of cardboard boxes delivered by UPS, Parcel Service, and FedEx. Things that had been shipped into us from all around the country. 4 boxes stand out in my mind. There are huge boxes. We opened them up and we found in each box 12 beautiful, brand new Land's End children's heavy-duty warm coats. This was something we desperately needed, and it's what I called for most in the community. It's interesting, we never found exactly who this was, But we know this much, that those 4 boxes came from a Green Bay Packer football player. How about that? The donations flowed in from the community. And I mean, twice a day, a truck would back up with unbelievable amounts of food and clothing and paper supplies. But we always had needs that weren't being filled by the boxes or the trucks. And I would make calls to people, and they were all incredible. But I have to call out especially an organization in Las Cruces, New Mexico, called Border Servants Corps. This was a good, big organization. I'd call them up. These winter coats were desperate. We needed them badly. I'd call them up and say, we need winter coats. And the next day, a truck would appear with used children's warm coats. The Red Cross was amazing too. They supplied the beds, the blankets, a lot of staples for food. When the place opened, they played a critical role in the transition between, and just helping us open. You know, I have to speak to the community a little bit, and I'll let a family represent the whole El Paso community, which is an amazing community. There's a family of 5, a Mexican family, and they gave, the whole family volunteered at the shelter in so many different ways, just every way possible. And the family and I became very, very close, and I was humbled to be invited to their house, which was a modest thing, and invited to a beautiful dinner. I'd have to say one of the finest dinners I've ever had, hosted by this family of most modest means. So I want to call them out especially because the day I left, the moment I was leaving, they were there. And in saying goodbye, all the children were crying over my leaving. I mean, I'd only known them a couple of months, but that's how close things became. So I want to call out a word that describes everything I just talked about, love. From the weeping man at the very beginning to this family at the end and everything in between, all the donations and the care we had for each other was about love. And that was one of the biggest lessons. Well, from the asylee's perspective, how does love endure in the face of challenge? And so I want to talk about human spirit and tell you some stories that might not be as happy. I'll start by asking you to walk with me again, early in the morning, before anybody in the dorm is up, before anybody else is up. I head outside near the showers to go through the recycled clothing. Now, you know, the asylees come in, and if there's time at the end, I'll tell you how they walk through the shelter. But one of the things they do is they go to a clothing bank, and they get a new set of clothes. And then they head out to the shower and take maybe their first shower in quite a while. And they leave their old clothes there. I go out and I go through them to prepare them for laundry. So walk out with me. We walk through the dorm. Everybody's asleep. The place is crowded. You see mothers with children, fathers with children, families with children, all sleeping so soundly. And it has a beauty. You can see it and appreciate it, but remember that scene. We get outside. We find the big tubs with the clothing. I pull out a T-shirt. Let's look at it. It's a mess. It's a holy mess. It's obviously come from the United States. It's got some sports team or some local event broadcast on the front. It's pretty beat up. It's ripped. I mean, the neckline, you cannot tell the color of the T-shirt from the neckline. You put it aside. You pull out some pants. They're ripped up the seam because of the ankle bracelet. Zipper doesn't work. It's an odd size. You can tell it's been stitched a little bit to close it around the waist, just to make it fit a little bit better. It too is filthy, dirty, and ripped all over. You pull out a sock, and it stops you. The smell is overwhelming. It doesn't even look like a sock. You smell sweat. Maybe you smell fear. You pull out some underpants. You hardly know what to do. They're so dirty. Human waste in every one. Been worn for weeks, maybe months. They're ripped. Is that violence? I do this every day. I don't wear gloves. I don't wear gloves out of solidarity. If they can wear those clothes, I can sort them. We walk back through the dorm. Now you look around and you see them a little differently. You see their sleep as something really special. You know a little bit more about their journey now. So everybody in that room you walked by has been robbed, shaken down, violated, maybe something worse. Everyone. I don't know the stories of all of them, but I've got some. Talk about Jesus and his 3-year-old son. He was in his early 20s. And he stood out before we knew anything about him with his attitude. He was going forward, you know. He saw opportunity. But over meals, he told us what happened. It was him and his son. We asked him, why are you alone? His wife was murdered just 2 weeks before. And the next day, they packed and left and arrived eventually in our shelter. And the two of them were a solid team, and you can understand why, having lost the mom and the wife. But it was their promise for the future that stood them apart. It was unique. There was a mother with a 5-year-old boy, and her story was even sadder. Her husband, her brother-in-law, and her father were all killed, all murdered by the cartel. She got out of town as quick as she could. She was a lot more realistic about what was in front of her and about the sadness she'd experienced. But she was there and ready to enter a new chapter of her life. Here's a story of a woman in a very small city in southern Mexico. She was a teller at a bank, and she was driving to work one day, and she saw a cartel or gangs force a car off a road and grab a woman out of the car and take her. Maybe you've read about this. They disappeared. Women disappear in Mexico. Well, that shocked her. Obviously, it shocks me to even think about it. She got to work, finished work. Next day, she's driving to work, and she sees cars coming to cut her off. She somehow, having seen the experience the day before, she escapes them and gets to work and runs inside where there's more people and safety and maybe guns for all I know. And she tells the manager right away what happened. He said, okay, you have to leave immediately, right now. You can't stay. They're looking for you. And he helped her get back to her house and contact the rest of her family. And they left within 20 minutes with just what they could carry. Mi hijo valiente, my brave son, is another story of a man and his teenage son And I don't know why they had to leave, but it was a horrible journey. And at some point, the father said to the son, I can't go further. I'm putting you through this. This is horrible. We're being robbed. We're being beaten. We're going slowly. We have no resources and we don't know where we're going. He said, we're going home, son. We've got to go home. And the brave son held his father and said, no, Dad, we're going forward. We're going together, the two of us. We'll go together. I'll help you. And they made it. They're in the shelter and on their way to their sponsors. I went into the break room one day and everybody in there was crying, all the volunteers. I found out what it was about. There was an extended family in Mexico, grandparents and a daughter. I don't know about the husband, the story there, but a daughter and a child, a very young child. And the daughter, the mother of the child, disappeared. And once you disappear, it's done. There's no search party. Everybody knows exactly what happened. So the grandparents took the 2-year-old and ran. They got to the border. They got across the border into their credible fear interview. Maybe we'll talk about that later. And they were asked about the child, and they said, "But hey, we'll tell you the truth. We are not the parents of this child. Here's what happened. The mother disappeared, and we've been taking care of the child since then." And there's some rule, I don't know, I can't explain it, but they took the 2-year-old into a children's detention facility. And the grandparents ended up coming to us. And you can only imagine how distraught they were. Just think of the history that they had been through. And we were tirelessly trying to find that 2-year-old. We never could. And I can't tell you what happened. I'd want to think that the 2-year-old was reunited. The grandparents ended up at a sponsor's house. And I'd like to think the 2-year-old is there too. Not everybody tells their story. Most people don't, actually. I was in the hygiene room handing out hygiene packets, and a woman came in with a child, and I gave her her packet, and I was explaining some things and asking how many blankets she needed, and she turned her head, and I saw the biggest scar I've ever seen going from her eye all the way down to her cheekbone, and it was fairly new. It wasn't open, but it was fairly new. She was closed. She was not making eye contact. She was stoic. She wanted her hygiene bag and the blankets and the sheet, and she was going back to the dorm. And she left me to just imagine what her story was. But with all the other material that I had, I could imagine enough, and I could let my heart bleed for that poor woman. These are just a few. It turns out there's a statistic that 67% of asylees had family members who were tortured, murdered, kidnapped, or disappeared. And yet the asylees in our dorm showed incredible equanimity, calm, focus, faith, and love. Love. Every day. Te amo. I love you. I used to get that note from the cutest little girls who would write that with a crayon using a different color for every letter. The goodbye hugs, whether we're at the airport or in the dorm, it was love. I spoke of broken hopes in the title to this talk. There's one big one. It's a really big one. Okay, so these asylees are headed off to a sponsor's house where they'll spend a year or two waiting for their court date, where they'll present their arguments. The broken hope is that only 2/3 of the asylees get asylum. The rest are deported. So we'll maybe talk again about the statistics of this and how many people actually get asylum out of how many people start traveling. It's insane. I might just mention that the odds of getting asylum rise dramatically if you have an immigration attorney beside you. They go up by a factor of 4. And if you're looking to help in any way, looking for a legal aid society that works with immigrants is one really good way. I want to go to more broken hopes and talk about coyotes, which might not connect immediately in your mind. Asylees are incredibly naive, and so was I, a coyote, who's a young man leading people across the desert. It's so much more than that. It turns out that the coyote organization, which is probably run by the cartels, is a vertically integrated, horizontally dispersed organization with incredible power. And to be honest, they, in my opinion, are one of the biggest issues, an issue that I think we could solve in our country. I'll give you an example of how vertically integrated they are. One day, we heard about a car parked in front of our place. I'll talk about security soon, but we worried about that. We went out, say, "What are you doing?" And it was Hugo. He said, "I'm Hugo." He said, "No, I'm a friend. I'm a friend." He said, "I've got luggage for some of your asylees." He said, "What I do is I meet them on the other side of the bridge and I take their luggage and I tell them I'll meet them on the other side when they get through." I don't know the details of how that's communicated or anything, but he had a bunch of luggage for people that were in our shelter. And oh my God, I said to him and to myself, what a nice guy, you know, he's really doing a nice thing for these people. He does it regularly. And it was only later that day I began to think about it and realized that it was really part of the coyote network, that's part of the package, that the people whose luggage was delivered had negotiated this in a contract. So if you're poor, you can cross the border in one way, asking for asylum. If you're not so poor, you can cross in another way. And I've heard stories of people with great wealth crossing the bridge, the border, easily with a coyote connection. But if you're in a little village, so many of these asylees that come to us come from little villages, and they are recruited by local coyotes. It's probably a big fee finder schedule. You know, if you send us asylees, we'll give you $10 each or something. And the coyotes tell the people in these villages, listen, you want to go to the United States, take your family, you know, you're going to earn a lot of money. You could end up in a house. You can send money back to relatives. You get a car. It's a good deal. But it's not a good deal. Because first of all, to qualify for asylum, you have to meet the definition of a refugee by a United Nations Convention, an agreement we agreed to back in the 60s, which means that you have to be persecuted on the basis of race, religion, nationality, membership of a political group, or your political opinion. And typically these people in the villages don't qualify. A lot of them would qualify for domestic violence or fear of gang violence, but that used to be accepted, but it is no longer accepted. So if you look at those 5 parts of what's required to be a asylee, very few in the villages pass, which means they'll just get deported. Well, so that's my view. Coyotes are a huge, huge problem. I want to talk about safety. We're getting near the end, of the talk. Well, first of all, health and sanitation. Pre-COVID, we were really good. We were doing what you all are doing right now. We sanitize the dorm every day, and we mop the floor maybe every 4 days. It was really good. To get in the food line, pre-COVID, you had to use hand sanitizer. So we handled that really well. But the safety, now this is going to be an interesting part. I was unaware. I was naive myself about safety challenges. I didn't have a clue. When I called them up to get directions to the shelter as I was driving there, they gave me the address of a restaurant down the street, Tony's Burrito Shop or something. They said, go to Tony's, here's the address, then go up the street to the blue door on the landing. And then ring a bell there. Well, that's weird, but I didn't think about it. I get inside and there's signs everywhere. Don't take pictures. No pictures allowed. Everywhere, on every wall is that sign. And I thought it was a privacy thing. That's one reason I don't have pictures for you. It wasn't. In many ways, it goes back to August 3rd of last year. August 3rd in El Paso. On August 3rd at about 10:30 in the morning, a 21-year-old white nationalist from the Dallas area walked in front of and later into the most productive Walmart store in the nation, only about 2 miles from the shelter. And he proceeded to open fire with basically an AK-47. And he killed very quickly 23 people and seriously injured several dozen others. I couldn't drive by that or walk past that Walmart and look at the memorial for those 23 deaths without choking up. Inside that Walmart, it was all brown skin. And that white nationalist picked that Walmart for that reason. We knew in the shelter that if a white nationalist thought about it and looked around and did some research and found out there was a shelter with a couple of hundred brown-skinned people in it, that might be a much more attractive target. That's why there's no address. You'll never find an address for Casa del Refugiado. And no pictures, because most cameras will geolocate every picture. And then if somebody posts their picture in any social media, that geolocation goes with it. Bam, there we are. Location identified. That's why there's an escort with that Sun Transit bus, just in case. We would often get these weird phone calls. Calling for Juan. Hey, Juan, he was there, and I know he's at his sponsor's house now, but he's an old friend, and I lost. Can you tell me how to get a hold of him? I just want to check in with him. We would hang up because we know that many of the people that pass through our shelter are escaping gangs and cartels, and they're still being hunted. Which gets me to a dramatic point in this presentation. We went into the dorm one morning. I did not go in this particular morning, and found a beehive. The whole dorm was wide awake. They never are at 6:45. They were just alive, buzzing with anxiety. And we learned quickly that at 2:30 in the morning, they'd awakened to find two people in the dorm, creeping around, looking around with tiny little flashlights. And when they called out these people, those two men dashed out a door, and nobody could find them. Wow. Well, in the context of August 3rd, in any context, we had to decide what to do about this. It couldn't be interpreted in a variety of ways, from not quite benign, but right up to the most serious. And we felt we had to treat this in the most serious way. We spent the rest of that day hardening our facility. We found places in our chain link fence where people could have gotten through. We had not been locking the outside door into the dorm, so anybody coming through there could have gotten into the dorm. We hardened that. We bought extra special lights. We assembled those. We parked a truck outside with the headlights on and a mannequin behind the wheel, sat that there all night long. We contacted the police. The police were running extra patrols. The captain of the local precinct said he was coming back off duty with his badge and gun to give us a little extra protection. We always had a volunteer in the dorm overnight. And the volunteer that was assigned that night could not face up to it. Another man and I agreed that we would split the shift that night, that we would, at one point, we were both going to stay outside and guard the outside door. And the police captain said, no, you're more valuable inside. Okay, so we split the shift, and he took the first shift until 2, and I took the 2 to 6 shift. And there I sat with 150 people in my custody. I'm responsible for them. I love every one of them. I got my phone on speed dial for the police station. I've got my every antenna out listening for anything unusual. And I wait, and I wait. And I think about what I'm going to do if something intrudes. Who am I? What's my responsibility? How much do I love? It was a powerful 4 hours. The sun came up. There was no intrusion. And I've never welcomed the sunrise as much as I did that one. There was an epiphany at that sunrise. I saw the sun come up, living with my own fear. And at that moment, I realized something really important, that what I was experiencing was exactly what every one of those asylees in the dorm experienced every single day of their lives. Suddenly, solidarity took on a whole new meaning. And in a few days, everything was back to normal. And nobody had really forgotten the intrusion, but we were going forward. So, going forward, in conclusion, I want to tell you that I didn't know people could be so strong. The asylees are the strongest people I've ever met in my life. I didn't know love was so powerful. It's driving me tonight. I left there a long time ago. I didn't know there were so many good people. I met hundreds and hundreds of them. Good people here in Friday Harbor. There's 100 times that or more. And in the face of all the trauma and the insensitive bureaucracy, I arrived home 6 months ago, full of hope and love. I gave a few months of my time, and I'm back here with a bursting heart. It is almost an hour. I think what I want to do is use just a few more minutes to share a screen and show you the inside of, now where did it go? I don't think I'm going to do that somehow. I don't see it. Instead, I'm going to show you, in summary, my contact information. But more important, it starts with Annunciation House, right up here. And you just have to type in annunciationhouse.org to go to their website. They operate 4 shelters in El Paso. Casa del Refugiado was mine. And they operate 4 shelters in Juarez. That's a fairly new operation. Casa del Refugiado costs $30,000 a month rent. And the utilities add at least another 10. Annunciation House, you'll read on their website, they've never accepted a dime from the government. It is all donations, and they could use donations. There's my contact information. And I've got a few references here, resources for you. Some of you probably know about Immigration Nation, a documentary that's on Netflix. It's very good. It's not about asylum seekers, but still very good. A book, The Devil's Highway, is about crossing the desert. It's a horrible story, worth reading. The Line Becomes a River is a book written by a border agent who's now a professor of English. Well written, good book. And finally, and maybe most important, This American Life had a show called The Outcrowd, and here's a link to it, and you can email me, or if you can't write it down that quickly, I'll get it to you separately. It describes conditions on the border, especially the situation regarding kidnapping. It is very worthwhile listening to. So I'll stop the share. I'll come back to you. And Boyd, are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Larry. I really appreciate it. And what I recommend everybody do is go to gallery view if you'd like, and we'll start in on the questions. I've got several questions in the chat box, and I just want to, before we start in, I just want to repeat that we are recording this program. So if you want to watch it again, there will be a link on the library website. And we'll also try to post Larry's resources that he just shared with us. And so you can get direct links that way. So I have a question right off the bat. Actually, this was during your talk. And I'll start out with that. It says, I imagine that most of these people hold religion close to their hearts. What support or access to priests is available in a shelter?
Great question. Great question. So there were about 8 full-time volunteers, including me there, but there are many, many part-time volunteers that would come through. And most commonly, the part-time volunteers were sisters, that is nuns, brothers, or priests. And I think there was always at least two people representing these 3 categories in the shelter at all times. It was very secular. There was no proselytizing or anything, but they were present. And if there was need for a celebration, a mass celebration, we had a chapel. And Lady of Guadalupe, for example, was a celebration that called for a mass that filled the chapel. So that resource was commonly available.
Okay. That person also had some other questions, but I'm gonna alternate here. So Elliot had a question: how has the pandemic changed how things operate there?
180 degrees. There was a brief period where Casa del Refugiado received COVID asylees. And we set aside a quarantined area. We had hazmat gear. I was not there. So, and then the border closed. So, and I think since then, everybody in detention got sent back across the border. So COVID changed everything.
Okay. There's a question, what is required of a sponsor and how does one become one?
Good question. I'm afraid I can't be very specific. I don't know, but I'm sure it requires some proof of resources to support the number of people for like 2 years. So I honestly don't know the answer.
Okay.
Who does?
I don't know.
Barbara, maybe we could, often with these programs, we try to provide resources. So maybe we could look that up and include it with the recording. So. And somebody said the sponsors were mostly family. So that's one answer.
Yes.
There was another question, any recommendations for legal aid groups to support?
You know, there's a big poster written in Spanish in the shelter listing all the legal aid resources, at least in the El Paso area. I should have taken a picture of it. I didn't. So I can't recommend any particular organization.
Okay. I'm seeing many thanks for your doing this, but I'm not seeing any new questions, Larry, unless somebody wants to raise their virtual hand or somehow get my attention or put a question in the chat box. Okay. Max says, let's see, Annunciation is now helping people in Juarez who are there because of the Remain in Mexico policy. So.
Yes. Okay. Hey, Boyd?
Yes.
Okay, I have somehow there we go. I'm going to do we have a minute? If I can share my screen and show the video that I was going to show.
Okay. Why don't we do 2 more questions that have come in and then you can do that. Sound good? Larry, how did you find the organization?
Hey, that's kind of a question I look forward to answering. So I want to tell you a quick little story. It's a long answer to a short question, but it's important. It turns out that Annunciation House got a lot of publicity a few years ago. Beginning in December 2018, the Border Patrol and ICE implemented a new policy of just releasing asylees at the bus station without providing resources to get them to the sponsor's house. And they did this unannounced, you know, I'm sure they had their reasons, but suddenly one night at like 11 at night, they dropped 200 asylees off at the bus station. It was a cold night. The bus station manager was going crazy. The police didn't know what to do. A man named Ruben Garcia, who runs Annunciation House, showed up, herded these 200 people together, walked them 1.5 miles up the road to 2 motels and put them in the motels overnight. And he ended up renting those 2 motels for the next 4 months in order to take care of the asylees that were being released. He couldn't afford to keep doing that, and that's why he rented the warehouse and turned it into a shelter. But the work that he did gave him a lot of publicity. And so I was watching the NewsHour one night, and there was an interview with Ruben Garcia about Annunciation House. And that was my connection. I liked what he did. I liked what he said. I looked up their website and submitted an application.
Well, that's great, Larry. So here's the follow-up question to that. Do you think you'd go again?
I can't wait to go back.
Wow. That's great. Okay. How about you want to try to share your video now and we'll give it a try?
Yes, and I think everybody will like this. This is going to be a video taken inside the shelter. And you're going to see a lot of artwork, and you need to hear this story that that when we first got the shelter, it was just a dirty old warehouse. And Ruben Garcia convinced the art students at University of Texas, El Paso to come in and paint murals all around the warehouse. And you're going to see a lot of those murals, and you'll see other points of interest that I'll describe. This is all in the shelter. Familia. This is the room where we record the important information about each asylee. We call it the intake room. And there's the intake forms. This is the hygiene room where they get sheets, blankets, razor blades. There's the Red Cross blankets, toothpaste. All this is donated. Everything you see, diapers. That's the doorway into the dorm. We divide the dorm into alphabetic sections. We want to separate single parents, families, families with no children. Roperia is the clothing bank. And here's some pictures of the clothing bank, all donated, I want to emphasize. Porta potties. We had, the warehouse, there's the showers from FEMA, by the way. 10 showers for women, 10 showers for men. And the warehouse didn't have adequate toiletry, so we had to bring in like 20 porta potties. This is now reminding everybody that we lock the door every night, and now we've got porta potties inside. The reason we left it open was so that people could get outside to use the porta potties. Now we have some inside. A volunteer would spend a night in the dorm. This is telling everybody that they're in case of emergency. And this is where we served meals. That's the table on which the donated food was served, and here it is being served. I saw a coffee cup. That was important. Here's the office. We had that's the screen on which we might see an ICE bus coming in. And the bulletin board is how we keep track of everybody coming and going. And for the first time, these asylees get to, we have a clinic that is just incredible. I should say we had a lot of pregnant women, and one woman came in like due in a week. It was a real trick. The artist that drew this wanted to show how migrant the houses were. And that's it. So that's a little peek inside a $30,000 a month warehouse.
Wow. Well, Larry, this has been great. Thank you so much. And I'm sure most of these folks seem to be your friends or connections. And if they have specific questions, I bet they can connect with you. But I do want to repeat that we are recording this, including the last video part of it, and we'll try to get some of those resources that you mentioned up on the library website also, so people can connect that way. But Larry, on behalf of the library, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing this experience with us. It was quite moving, and I just really loved it. Thank you.
Boyd, thank you. Listen, it was my honor to represent these thousands of people that passed by me. Thank you for listening.